David had been living on the streets for 3 years. People would look at him and turn their heads away. But that evening, faced with little Emma's tears, there was something no one could refuse: innocence. When David spent his last dollar to get this child home safely, he had no idea who would be knocking on his door 72 hours later. The November wind cut through downtown Seattle like a blade, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant hum of traffic. Beneath the flickering streetlight on Pine Street, David Martinez sat huddled in his makeshift shelter, a collection of cardboard boxes he'd carefully arranged behind a closed bookstore. His weathered hands, cracked from years of outdoor living, gripped a steaming cup of coffee he'd managed to buy with the coins he'd collected throughout the day. At 42, David's face told a story of hardship etched in deep lines around his tired brown eyes. His graying beard was unkempt, and his worn jacket, once navy blue, now faded to an indeterminate gray, had seen better days. But despite his circumstances, there was still a spark of dignity in his posture, a remnant of the man he used to be. 3 years ago, David had been a different person entirely. He'd worn pressed suits, carried a briefcase, and lived in a modest apartment with his wife, Sarah. He'd worked as a security supervisor at a downtown office building, earning enough to keep them comfortable. But cancer had taken Sarah, and with her went David's will to maintain the life they'd built together. Medical bills drained their savings, grief consumed his ability to work, and eventually, the streets became his only option. Now, as he sipped his coffee and watched the occasional passerby hurry past without making eye contact, David reflected on how invisible he'd become. To most people, he was part of the urban landscape, something to be avoided, ignored, or, at best, pitied from a safe distance. The city's sounds were beginning to quiet when David heard something that made him freeze. It was a sound that cut through the ambient noise like a knife: the unmistakable cry of a child in distress. David set down his coffee and listened intently. There it was again, coming from the direction of the main street. Without hesitation, he emerged from his cardboard shelter and followed the sound. As he rounded the corner onto the busier thoroughfare, he saw her. A small girl, no more than 7 years old, stood alone under a street lamp. She was dressed in a pink winter coat that looked expensive, with matching boots and a small backpack decorated with cartoon characters. Her long, dark hair was disheveled, and tears streamed down her rosy cheeks as she looked around frantically. David approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her further. His heart ached seeing this child so distressed and alone. As he drew closer, he could see she was shivering, whether from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. "Hey there, little one," David said softly, crouching down to her eye level, about 6 feet away. "Are you okay?" The girl looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. She took a small step back but didn't run. Something in David's gentle voice seemed to calm her slightly. I can't find my daddy," she whispered between sobs. "We were walking and I saw a puppy in the window. And when I turned around, Daddy was gone." David's heart broke a little more. He glanced around the street, looking for any sign of frantic parents or concerned adults, but saw only the usual late-evening crowd hurrying past, most of them oblivious to the small drama unfolding. "What's your name, sweetheart?" David asked, maintaining his distance, but speaking in the warmest tone he could muster. "Emma," she replied, wiping her nose with the back of her small hand. "Emma Chen." "That's a beautiful name, Emma. I'm David." He smiled gently. "Do you know your daddy's phone number?" Emma shook her head. I'm only 7. Daddy says I don't need to know it yet because we're always together. David nodded understandingly. He looked around again, hoping to spot a desperate parent searching for their child, but the street remained indifferent to their situation. Emma, do you remember anything about where you were going with your daddy? Maybe a restaurant or a store? The little girl's face brightened slightly. We were going to buy me new shoes. Daddy said we'd go to the big store with the pretty lights. David knew she was probably referring to Nordstrom, which was about 6 blocks away. It was getting colder, and Emma was clearly exhausted and scared. He made a decision that would change both their lives. Emma, I think we should get you somewhere warm while we figure out how to find your daddy. Is that okay? Emma hesitated, looking at David's disheveled appearance. But something in his eyes, perhaps the genuine concern she saw there, made her nod slowly. We're going to walk to the police station, David explained. The police officers there are very good at helping little girls find their daddies. The nearest police station was 8 blocks away, and David knew it would be a challenging walk for a tired 7-year-old. As they began walking, Emma's small hand slipped into his larger one, a gesture that surprised him with its trust and innocence. Are you cold, Emma? David asked as they walked slowly down the sidewalk. A little, she admitted. Without hesitation, David stopped and shrugged off his jacket. It was the only coat he owned, and the night was getting colder. But he wrapped it around Emma's small shoulders anyway. The jacket dwarfed her tiny frame, but it was warm from his body heat. Thank you, Emma said quietly, looking up at him with eyes that reminded him painfully of his wife Sarah. As they walked, Emma began to talk more freely. She told David about her school, her favorite teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and her pet goldfish named Bubbles. She spoke about her daddy, how he worked a lot but always made time for their Saturday adventures together. Daddy says I'm his princess, Emma said with a small smile. He says one day I'll run his whole company. Your daddy sounds like a very smart man, David replied, though something about Emma's casual mention of a company made him curious about what kind of family she came from. They were halfway to the police station when Emma suddenly stopped walking. David, I'm really tired, she said, swaying slightly on her feet. David looked around and spotted a 24-hour diner across the street. The warm light spilling from its windows looked inviting, and he made another decision that would drain his last resources. Come on, Emma. Let's get you something warm to drink and maybe a snack. The diner was nearly empty, except for a few late-shift workers and an elderly man reading a newspaper. The waitress, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, named Rose, according to her name tag, approached them with a concerned expression. Everything all right here? Rose asked, clearly noting the unusual pair they made. This little girl is lost, David explained. We're heading to the police station, but she needed to warm up first. Rose's expression softened immediately. Oh, honey, she said to Emma. Let's get you some hot chocolate. David counted the coins in his pocket. He had $3.47, not much, but enough for a hot chocolate and maybe a small snack for Emma. As Rose brought the steaming mug and a plate of cookies, David felt a profound sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Emma wrapped her small hands around the warm mug and took careful sips. The color returned to her cheeks, and she began to look more like the vibrant child she was. My daddy is probably so worried, Emma said suddenly, her eyes filling with tears again. "Hey, it's going to be okay," David assured her. "Your daddy loves you very much, and we're going to find him very soon." Rose approached their table again. "I called the police," she said quietly to David. "They're checking for any missing child reports. Should be here in a few minutes." David nodded gratefully. As they waited, Emma laid her head against David's arm, exhaustion finally overtaking her adrenaline. For a moment, David felt what it might have been like to be a father. The protective instinct, the willingness to sacrifice anything for this small person's welfare. When the police officers arrived, everything happened quickly. Emma was indeed reported missing, and within an hour, they were at the station waiting for her father to arrive. "You did a good thing tonight," Officer Martinez told David. "Not everyone would have stopped to help." David shrugged. "She's just a little kid. Anyone would have done the same." But Officer Martinez had seen enough of human nature to know that wasn't true. At 2:17 a.m., the police station doors burst open. A man in an expensive suit rushed in, his hair disheveled, his face a mask of panic and relief. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and control. "Emma!" he called out. And the little girl who had been dozing in a chair beside David immediately perked up. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself into her father's arms, and David watched the reunion with a mixture of happiness and something he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was longing for the family he'd never had. Or maybe it was the knowledge that his brief but meaningful connection with this child was about to end. The man, Emma's father, held his daughter tightly, his eyes closed in obvious relief. When he finally opened them, they landed on David, who had stood up respectfully but remained at a distance. "You're the man who found her?" Emma's father asked, approaching David with Emma still in his arms. "Yes, sir," David replied quietly. "She was scared and cold. I just made sure she got somewhere safe." The man studied David's appearance, the worn clothes, the weathered face, the obvious signs of someone living rough. But instead of the judgment David expected, he saw something else in the man's eyes. Profound gratitude. "I'm Marcus Chen," the man said, extending his hand, "and I owe you everything." David shook the offered hand. "David Martinez. I'm just glad she's safe." Marcus set Emma down gently. "Emma, did this man take good care of you?" Emma nodded vigorously. "Daddy, David gave me his jacket when I was cold, and he bought me hot chocolate and cookies, and he walked with me all the way to the police station. He was really nice to me." Marcus's eyes widened slightly as he took in this information. He looked at David again, this time noting details he'd missed before. The way David had instinctively stepped back to give the family space, the genuine care in his eyes when he looked at Emma, the fact that he was still wearing only a thin shirt despite the cold night. "Where's your jacket?" Marcus asked suddenly. David glanced down at himself, then at Emma, who was still wearing his oversized coat. "Emma needed it more than I did." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He knelt down to Emma's level. "Princess, can you give David his jacket back for now?" As Emma shrugged off the jacket and handed it to David, Marcus noticed how David immediately put it on, not from vanity, but from genuine need for warmth. "Mr. Martinez," Marcus said formally, I'd like to talk with you privately for a moment, if that's okay." They stepped aside while Emma chatted with Officer Martinez, who had kindly offered her a coloring book to keep her occupied. "I need to ask you something," Marcus said quietly. "And please, be honest with me. Did you know who Emma was when you found her? Did you know who her family is?" David looked confused. "Should I have? She told me her name was Emma Chen. That's all I knew." Marcus studied David's face intently. There was no trace of deception, no hint of recognition. This man genuinely had no idea that he'd just saved the daughter of one of Seattle's most prominent businessmen. "Mr. Martinez, what do you do for a living?" David's face flushed slightly with embarrassment. "Right now, I'm between situations. I used to work in security." Marcus nodded slowly. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" The question hung in the air. David could lie, could pretend he had somewhere to go, but something about this man's direct gaze made honesty seem like the only option. "I'll be fine, Mr. Chen. I'm just glad Emma is safe." Marcus made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. "Mr. Martinez, I'd like you to be our guest tonight. We have plenty of room, and it's the least I can do to thank you properly." David's eyes widened. "That's very kind. But I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," Marcus interrupted. "It's an invitation. And frankly, after what you've done for my family tonight, I'd be honored to have you as our guest." David looked over at Emma, who was now coloring happily, completely oblivious to the conversation taking place. He thought about his cardboard shelter, about the cold night ahead, about the dignity Marcus was offering him in this moment. "If you're sure it wouldn't be any trouble," David said quietly. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from him. "No trouble at all." The ride to the Chen family home was unlike anything David had experienced in years. Marcus's car was a sleek black Mercedes, with leather seats that seemed to envelop David in luxury he'd forgotten existed. Emma chattered happily from her car's seat, telling her father all about her adventure and how David had taken care of her. As they drove through the increasingly upscale neighborhoods, David began to understand that the Chen family was not just well off. They were wealthy. Very wealthy. The houses grew larger, the lawns more manicured, and the distance between properties greater with each passing block. When they finally pulled through the gates of the Chen estate, David's breath caught in his throat. The house, mansion really, was a stunning display of modern architecture and old-world elegance. Soft lighting illuminated perfectly landscaped gardens, and the circular driveway led to an entrance that looked like something from a magazine. "Welcome to our home," Marcus said simply, as if this palatial residence was the most normal thing in the world. Emma had fallen asleep during the drive, and Marcus carried her gently from the car. David followed, feeling increasingly out of place with each step. His worn shoes seemed to echo loudly on the marble steps leading to the front door. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. High ceilings, elegant furnishings, and artwork that David suspected was probably worth more than most people's houses. But despite its grandeur, the space somehow felt warm and lived in. Clearly a home rather than just a showplace. "Let me get Emma settled, and then we can talk," Marcus said, heading toward a sweeping staircase. David stood in the foyer, afraid to touch anything, unsure where to look. This was a world so far removed from his current reality that it felt almost surreal. A woman appeared from what David assumed was the kitchen. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Mr. Martinez," she said. "I'm Mrs. Rodriguez, the housekeeper. Mr. Chen called ahead and told me what you did for little Emma tonight." "It was nothing, really," David replied, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "It was everything," Mrs. Rodriguez corrected gently. "Can I get you something to eat?" "Some coffee? You must be exhausted." David realized he was indeed hungry. He hadn't eaten since early that morning. "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." Mrs. Rodriguez led him to a sitting area adjacent to the kitchen, a cozy space that was clearly the family's informal gathering place. Family photos covered a side table, and David could see images of Emma at various ages, always with Marcus, but notably no other parent in the pictures. Marcus returned a few minutes later, having changed from his suit into casual clothes. He looked more relaxed, but no less distinguished. "Emma's fast asleep," he said, settling into a chair across from David. "She wanted me to tell you thank you again, and that she hopes you'll still be here when she wakes up." Mrs. Rodriguez brought coffee and a plate of sandwiches, which she set down with motherly insistence that David eat something. "Mr. Martinez," Marcus began, "I want you to know that what you did tonight, there aren't words for it. In a world where most people would have walked past a lost child, you stopped. You spent your own money. Money I suspect you couldn't afford to spend. To take care of a stranger's daughter." David shifted uncomfortably. Any parent would have done the same. "Are you a parent?" Marcus asked gently. David's expression grew distant. "Number my wife and I. We tried, but it wasn't meant to be. She passed away 3 years ago." Marcus nodded with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know something about losing a spouse. Emma's mother died when Emma was 2. Cancer." A moment of shared understanding passed between the two men. Both widowers, both shaped by loss in different ways. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus continued. "How did you end up in your current situation?" David was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee and gathering his thoughts. Finally, he began to speak. "I used to work security for a large office building downtown. Had a good job, a small apartment, a normal life. When Sarah got sick, I took time off to care for her. Used up all my sick leave, then my vacation time, then took unpaid leave. The medical bills, even with insurance, they were overwhelming." He paused, the memories clearly painful. "After Sarah died, I couldn't seem to get back on track. Lost the job, couldn't make rent. Ended up on the street. Been there for 3 years now." Marcus listened without judgment, his expression thoughtful. "What kind of security work did you do?" "Building security mainly. Some personal protection for executives. I had certifications in crisis management, emergency response. I was good at my job." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Martinez, David, I have a proposition for you. But first, I need to tell you something about myself and why tonight was so important to me." David waited, sensing that Marcus was about to share something significant. "I'm the CEO of Chen Enterprises. We're a technology and real estate development company. I work long hours, travel frequently, and Emma is the most important thing in my world. Tonight, when I couldn't find her, Marcus's voice trailed off for a moment. I realized how vulnerable we both are. How much I need someone I can trust completely to help me keep her safe. David began to understand where this conversation was heading. I'm offering you a job, David. Head of personal security for my family. It would include a full-time salary, benefits, and housing on the property. Most importantly, it would mean being part of Emma's life, helping to keep her safe. David stared at Marcus, certain he had misheard. Mr. Chen, that's incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of responsibility. You're exactly the right person, Marcus said firmly. Tonight proved that. You put a child's welfare above your own comfort, your own needs. You treated Emma with kindness and respect. Those are qualities that can't be taught. They're part of who you are. David felt overwhelmed. Hours ago, he'd been sleeping in cardboard boxes. Now he was being offered a job, a home, a chance at a new life. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say you'll think about it, Marcus replied. Stay here tonight, get some rest, and we can talk more in the morning. But David, I want you to know, this isn't charity. This is me recognizing that you're exactly the person my family needs. David woke the next morning in a bed so comfortable he'd forgotten such things existed. The guest room where he'd slept was larger than the apartment he'd once shared with Sarah. With windows that overlooked gardens so perfectly maintained, they looked like a painting. For a moment, he wondered if the entire previous night had been a dream. But then he heard voices from downstairs, Emma's laughter and Marcus's deeper tones, and reality settled back into place. Mrs. Rodriguez had laid out clean clothes for him, and David showered for the first time in weeks, washing away layers of street living and beginning to feel human again. When he looked in the mirror, he saw glimpses of the man he used to be. Downstairs, Emma was eating breakfast and chattering excitedly about her adventure the night before. When she saw David, her face lit up. David, Daddy said you're going to stay with us. Is that true? David looked questioningly at Marcus, who smiled. I may have gotten a little ahead of myself. Emma's been asking about you since she woke up. I told all my friends at breakfast that you're my hero, Emma announced proudly. David felt his heart clench with emotion. When had anyone last called him a hero? Marcus gestured for David to join them at the breakfast table. I've been thinking about our conversation last night. I'd like to formally offer you the position we discussed. Head of personal security with full benefits and housing. What do you say? David looked around the table, at Emma's hopeful face, at Marcus's genuine expression, at Mrs. Rodriguez beaming from the doorway. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. I say yes, David replied quietly. And thank you, both of you. Emma cheered and clapped her hands, while Marcus smiled with obvious relief. There's just one condition, Marcus added. Emma has been asking if you'll teach her how to be as brave as you were last night. David laughed, a sound he hadn't made in months. I think she's already braver than I ever was. David stood in the security office of the Chen estate, reviewing the daily reports. His transformation over the past 3 months had been remarkable. Gone were the worn clothes and defeated posture. In their place was a man who carried himself with renewed purpose and pride. He'd thrown himself into his new role with the dedication of someone given a second chance at life. He'd updated the estate's security systems, established protocols for Emma's daily activities, and most importantly, become a trusted friend and protector to the little girl who had changed his life. Emma knocked on his office door, a routine they'd established for after school. "David, can we practice self-defense today?" He'd been teaching Emma basic safety skills. How to stay aware of her surroundings, what to do if she ever got separated from her family again, simple techniques for staying safe. But more than that, he'd been teaching her about kindness, about helping others, about the importance of seeing people for who they really are. "Of course, Emma. But first, tell me about your day." As Emma chattered about school, David reflected on how much his life had changed. He had purpose again, people who cared about him, a reason to wake up each morning. All because he'd made one simple decision on a cold November night: to help a child in need. Marcus appeared in the doorway, home early from work. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked. And David felt the warmth of being included in that statement. "David's teaching me how to be brave," Emma announced. "Actually," David said, looking at both Emma and Marcus, "Emma taught me about being brave first. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in the kindness of others." Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "And sometimes," he added, "the bravest thing is to keep your heart open to helping others, even when life has been hard on you." As David watched Emma run off to play in the garden, with Marcus following to spend time with his daughter, he thought about the chain of events that had brought him here. A lost child, a cold night, a simple choice to care about someone else's welfare. He'd learned that sometimes the people who have the least to give are the ones most willing to give everything. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change not just one life, but many. 3 years of living on the streets had taught David about survival. But one night with a lost little girl had taught him about living. Sometimes, the most profound changes in our lives come from the simplest choices. David's decision to help a frightened child wasn't motivated by any hope of reward. It came from a place of pure human compassion in a world that often feels cold and disconnected. David's story reminds us that kindness is never wasted, that dignity doesn't depend on circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply to see them as human. Emma found her way home that night. But in truth, so did David. And Marcus discovered that the security his family needed most wasn't about alarms or cameras. It was about having someone who would care for them as if they were his own. 3 lives, forever changed by one moment of choosing compassion over indifference. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Inspiring Life Stories. Remember, your kindness today might just be the beginning of someone else's miracle. Thank you for watching, and never forget, in a world where you can be anything, choose to be kind.